Let's be honest, when you hear the word logarithm, you probably get a flashback to high school math class, and maybe it's not the best memory. But what if I told you that this wasn't just some random concept made to torture students? What if it was actually a revolutionary invention, a kind of secret key that unlocked centuries of scientific progress? Well, today, we're going to talk about that, how one incredible idea literally smashed through a wall that was holding all of humanity back.
And just to set the stage, listen to this quote from Johannes Kepler, one of the greatest astronomers who ever lived. He spent years of his life doing grueling, mind-numbing calculations to figure out how planets move. And here he is basically saying that with this one tool, years of his work could have been done in a few hours. That tells you everything you need to know about how badly a solution was needed.
So, to really get why this was such a big deal, we have to rewind the clock. Picture it. It's the late 1500s, early 1600s. It's the age of discovery. We've got ships sailing across vast oceans, astronomers mapping the stars in more detail than ever before, but all this amazing new data created a huge, crippling problem, a bottleneck.
Progress was literally slamming into a brick wall, a wall made of calculation. If you wanted to figure out where your ship was in the middle of the ocean, or understand the orbits of the planets, you had to multiply and divide these enormous, messy numbers. And you had to do it all by hand. It was unbelievably slow, super tedious, and, one tiny mistake could throw everything off. Science was basically drowning in its own numbers.
But right in the middle of this calculation crisis, one guy looked at this massive wall and thought, you know what? I think I can knock that thing down. He was a Scottish mathematician, and he decided to make it his life's work.
That man's name was John Napier, and this guy was just obsessed with making calculations easier. Before he came up with logarithms, he'd already invented this cool little tool called Napier's bones. They were basically special rods that helped with multiplication. But even he knew that was just a patch. A much bigger, more fundamental solution was needed.
And let me tell you, that solution did not come overnight. Napier spent 2 decades, that's 20 years, working on this idea. It's estimated that he did something like 10 million calculations by hand just to create his first set of tables. I mean, this wasn't some sudden eureka moment. This was an absolute marathon of pure intellectual grit.
Okay, so here's the revolutionary idea he came up with, and it's so elegant. He asked, what if you could take a really hard multiplication problem and, like magic, turn it into a super easy addition problem? So he created this system of corresponding numbers, what he'd eventually call logarithms, that did exactly that. Instead of multiplying two giant numbers, you could just look up their logarithms in his table and add those together. It was a total game changer.
So in 1614, he finally published his masterpiece, and get this title, Description of the Miraculous Canon of Logarithms. He called it miraculous, and honestly, he wasn't exaggerating. The name itself, logarithm, he made it up from 2 Greek words that basically mean ratio number, which hints at the really cool math behind it all.
Now, Napier's invention was pure genius, but, like a lot of version 1.0 technologies, it was a little clunky. It was brilliant, but it needed a crucial software update, let's say, to really take off.
So, an English mathematician named Henry Briggs gets his hands on Napier's book, and his mind is completely blown. He sees the potential immediately, but he also spots a few ways to make it way more user-friendly. So what does he do? He makes the long journey all the way up to Scotland just to meet Napier and suggest an upgrade.
And this is one of my favorite parts of the story, because it's all about collaboration. Briggs basically said, hey, since we all count in tens, why don't we make the logarithms based on the number 10? It'll just make more sense. And Napier, instead of getting all defensive about his life's work, immediately saw that Briggs was right. He agreed it was a much better idea. Just incredible humility.
Sadly, Napier passed away not long after that meeting. But Henry Briggs dedicated the rest of his life to finishing their shared project. He spent years calculating and publishing the first tables of these new, improved, common logarithms. And this became the essential tool, the scientific calculator of its day, that powered science and engineering for the next 300 years.
So the big question is, just how much of a difference did this new tool really make? Well, to answer that, let's circle back to our friend Johannes Kepler, who was still waging his war with Mars.
The impact was immediate, and it was dramatic. As soon as Kepler heard about logarithms, he was all in. It was like giving him a computational superpower. Armed with this new tool, he could finally crunch through all the mountains of data he had and publish his Rudolphine tables, which were, by far, the most accurate star charts the world had ever seen.
And this revolution just cascaded outwards from there. It wasn't just for astronomers. Suddenly, sailors could navigate the oceans more accurately, making sea voyages safer. Surveyors could create precise maps of land. Even people in finance could now calculate things like compound interest without wanting to pull their hair out. This one little math trick accelerated progress in almost every part of society.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Okay, cool history lesson, but we have computers and smartphones now. Who cares about logarithms? Well, here's the thing. While we don't use the paper tables anymore, the idea of logarithms is baked into the fabric of our modern world. You use it all the time without even realizing it.
The key is something called logarithmic scales. They are an amazing way to take phenomena that span these huge, mind-boggling ranges from absolutely tiny to astronomically large and squish them down into a simple scale that our brains can actually understand. In a weird way, it's how our senses already work with things like light and sound.
A perfect example is the Richter scale for earthquakes. When you hear about an earthquake going from a magnitude 5 to a 6, it's not just one step up. The shaking is actually 10 times more powerful. A jump from a 5 to a 7, that's 100 times more shaking. The logarithmic scale makes that enormous difference easy to talk about.
It's the exact same idea with sound, with the decibel scale. It lets us measure everything from a quiet whisper to a jet engine on a nice, simple scale. But a small jump in decibels is actually a giant leap in sound energy.
And one more, the pH scale in chemistry. It takes a massive range of acidity and puts it on that simple 0 to 14 scale we all learned about. It's a logarithmic scale, and it's absolutely fundamental to chemistry, biology, pretty much all of life science. So, when you look at the whole story, it's pretty incredible. What started as one person's solution to a very human problem, the sheer boredom and difficulty of multiplication, ended up becoming a whole new language. A language that let us not only calculate the stars, but also understand the world right here around us in a totally new way.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question. Napier broke through the calculation wall of his time. Today, we're facing our own walls, right? Things like processing big data, building complex AI, modeling the climate. So it makes you wonder, what's going to be our logarithm? What's the next big invention that's going to come along and completely change our ability to calculate, and in turn, our ability to discover?